Good evening, everybody. It's great to be with you. There's a moment in Stephen Sexton's wonderful book of poems, If All the World and Love Were Young, where a handsome young doctor comes into a hospital room. Inside that room, a son, a close poetic version of the poet himself, is attending to his mother, who is dying of cancer. Throughout the book, with great intimacy and great passion, we get revealing snippets of the dialogue that takes place between the son and the mother over time as the inevitable approaches. The conversations are sometimes quirky and fragmented. They're influenced by memory, by nostalgia, by longing, by pain, and sometimes by morphine. At one point, very poignantly, the mother tells the son that the first word he ever spoke was apple. Because of this wealth of beautifully conveyed private detail, and because of the thematic richness of the book itself, when the doctor speaks, the reader feels themselves to be part of the family's world. I'll give you a flavor of that world with the following excerpt. This is from the poem Valley Fortress. My head is heavier than stone. I read yesterday's newspapers, eat crisps from the vending machine. I want to die, is what she says, not either asleep or awake. Let me please die, is what she says. It's me. I'm here, is what I say. But I am not, since she is not. Then she says, I want to go home. Once more, for once more, one night. And I say, you can't go home now. She says, I know, not now, after. The doctor, despite his formidable appearance, does not come off as an icon of hospital empathy. But it is a mark of the delicacy of the writing and a mark of Sexton's brilliant effort to find the core truth of his own experience, that this doctor is not represented in strictly negative terms. It's fair to say that his reticence is emotionally off the mark, and yet there is no hint of a family member's grievance in the way the doctor's cameo role is constructed in the book. What comes across instead, ultimately, is a graphic take on the function of medical communication skills. I'll quote from the poem Chocolate Fortress here. With his stethoscope slung around his broad shoulders like an athlete with a towel, Hippocrates says, for now, the pain must stay here in the small room without flowers. There's nice humor in that title, Hippocrates, which is Sexton's nickname for his mother's doctor. Hippocrates, many of you will know, was a Greek physician and writer who produced the endlessly adaptable principle, first do no harm. His name also endures with the well-known Hippocratic Oath. The cheekiness of that nickname is an example of what I mean when I say there is no family grievance in the portrait of the doctor. But we can also observe here that a family member desperately in need of compassionate and professional support within a hospital is armed with a quick reminder of what modern medicine should be able to do, namely, be humane. You do your thing, doctor, and I'll do mine here at my mother's side, the poet seems to say. And this divergence is apparent in the mystifying last line of the passage I just quoted, where Hippocrates says, for now, the pain must stay here, in the small room without flowers. That isn't Stephen Sexton quoting from a remembered experience, but it's a brilliant capturing of the implications of the universal feeling of being lost in the land of the sick. And it's also a gripping translation into humane poetic terms of the effects of clinical language. This is just one example of the uncanny clustering of insight and feeling that defines If All the World and Love Were Young. And there's no doubt about it, it's a book that invites interpretations, and no doubt that it will do so for many years to come. It has what the great American poet Wallace Stevens thought of as one of the hallmarks of true poetry. It is inexhaustible to meditation. Sophisticated reading, however, is not a requirement in order to be drawn into the work of this deeply original poet. We needn't necessarily submit ourselves to the high frequencies of metaphor and intertextuality, or to all of the superbly inventive moments of abstraction that are woven into accounts of lived experience and lived suffering in this book, in order to go with it, in order to feel immersed. And the reason for this is that Sexton casts a narrative spell, and he can speak with earthy colloquial grace, as if he is doing just that, speaking from the page. He is a storyteller as well as a poet. And If All the World and Love Were Young is a kind of customized and supercharged novella. It is certainly a book that is defined by the poet's respect for the reader. If it wasn't, he couldn't get us so powerfully with his singular images, as he does perhaps most memorably when, after Hippocrates says there's nothing more that can be done, the son, at sea in a palliative care scenario and driven by love's surest instinct, decides that he will fix the human condition by spending an eternity saying goodbye to his mother. The poem number 7, Larry's Castle, concludes with the following astonishing lines. What kind of story do I tell? Apple is the longest story. I know. Let's see. How does it go again? Apple, apple, apple. This is a supremely moving and dramatic moment in a book that shines with brave clarity and relatability. And yet, it's also important to say that a kind of visionary delight is essential to Stephen Sexton's achievement to date. And in a very immediate way, that is what we are bound to take away from it. The sense of a real world rendered subtle, of deep and strange emotion granted diverse and recognizable form, the sense of an intensifying loss being met head on, but being pushed back too by swells of imagination and wild-minded writing. In the interview we're about to enjoy between Carlo Gébler and Stephen Sexton, we're likely to hear something about the Nintendo dimensions of If All the World and Love Were Young. That fascinating side of things has been a significant part of the story of the book's breakthrough success, and it connects without doubt to its thrilling originality, but it is, in fact, not the full story of the book's strength. Ingeniously, and again passionately, Sexton incorporates the look, the terms, and the topography of the iconic Nintendo game Super Mario. But his truer achievement is that he has gone so far and so skillfully into his subject matter and into his own personal poetic resources that he has managed to approach an era-defining and infinitely popular video game and all of its associations with childhood and teenage escapism, and convert them to a vehicle for a new understanding of human experience, and into a means for the creation of a new poetic language, a medium that absolutely belongs to his own voice. That achievement, that authenticity, together with the readership that they have earned, and the gift of speculation with regard to what it means for Irish poetry now, and Irish poetry's future are worth celebrating. On a dark pandemic night, when inner resources are at a premium, they are, of course, also worth talking about. Thank you.
Stephen, welcome. My name is Carlo Gébler. I'm one of the judges on the Rooney Prize committee. The Rooney Prize was established by the Rooney family and is now in the tender care of Peter Rooney. It's a prize that's been around for 40 years and it's a prize for promise. So it's this book, your previous book, Oils, and our sense that you're destined for greatness. The first thing I want to talk about is the title. If all the world and love were young. It comes from the canon, doesn't it? It comes from, tell us where it comes from.
It does. And hello, Carlo.
Hello.
And hello, Martin. Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. It is extraordinary to feel so understood by someone, especially because I think there are slightly challenging things here. And it's another reason why this award, this recognition means so much, because it is a remarkable feeling to feel understood. It's a very generous thing. And my thanks to you, Carlo, and to Peter Rooney, of course. The title does, so it comes, I don't know how this is for other writers, but the title came quite late in the day. You know, I was thinking, how am I going to position this strange book that I was thinking was partly about Super Mario, was partly a pastoral poem, a long pastoral poem. And, you know, I went back to that pastoral tradition that in English, really, I suppose we start with someone like Christopher Marlowe, who I think he writes come live with me and be my love, and we will all the pleasures prove. I think that poem's maybe published in 1599. I think that's when it was. And, you know, it's this poem extolling the natural world that we can live in this idealized, beautiful landscape forever. It's kind of a courting song, a courting poem. Come live with me and be my love. And, you know, we'll live happily forever in this fantastic kind of landscape. A year after that, I think 1600. Don't worry, but let's run rapidly to the present day in a moment. But there's a response to that poem by Sir Walter Raleigh, who disagrees. He says, no, that's not what the world is like. It's not this idealized landscape. We don't live forever. Things change. Flowers fade. And the first line of that poem is, if all the world and love were young. So these two poems about pastoral, about how we look at landscapes, how we look at the world, they constitute this argument. You know, one says, yes, let's have the idealized world, we can live there. The other says, no, that's not how it is. Things change, we lose people. So when I was coming through it, I decided I would try to find a way to indicate where I sit on this, because the book really in its two movements is that argument, I think, between idealism and realism. It's the idealism of, you know, let's play around in a video game, let's stay forever in this landscape, or let's go to the other side of the window and confront that things aren't always the way we'd like them to be. So this movement between idealism and realism, to me, seems to be at the heart of it.
I mean, Sir Walter Raleigh strikes me as a sort of pastoral anti-pastoralist. I went and read both of the poems in preparation for this. I mean, I was delighted to be directed towards them. There's something very bracing about Sir Walter Raleigh. He really does make you sit up. Martin talked about the Nintendo stroke Super Mario aspect, which has its roots in your own autobiography. Tell us, if you don't mind, tell us about that.
Gladly. So, I mean, for large periods of my life, between, I think, maybe 1995, for a couple of years of intense dedication to the art of the Super Nintendo. You know, that's what I did as a young person with my brother. I played the Super Nintendo, and particularly I played Super Mario. And for those of us who might not be as absolutely familiar with it as I am, who didn't have those many years of dedication, Mario is a small video game character. His destiny in life is to run left to right across the screen. You might make him jump over enemies, over gaps in the ground. He might encounter interesting things that you're responsible for negotiating. I mean, among other things, that's how one might hope a line of verse works, moving left to right, encountering interesting and challenging things. So in part of my imagination, there is this left to right movement, this negotiation of landscapes. But that was very much something I did as a younger person. When I was much older, I was writing a lot of poems, largely about images. I'm very interested in photographs, very interested in paintings. And how one goes about writing about them, why one goes about writing about them. And when I was doing that, thinking about images I liked and trying to produce new and interesting poems about them, I kind of failed at that. I became kind of bored of the prospect of finding a new language for each image, because I feel that's involved, that when you try to respond to an image in language, you kind of have to find a new way of talking about it, of making language do something respectfully in the face of that image. So I grew a little bored and I grew a little mischievous, and I thought, well, if I'm going to write about images, why don't I write about Super Mario? Why don't I write about a video game? Why don't I treat it with the same sort of ultimate respect that Auden does in his poem Musée de Beaux-Arts, about suffering, they were never wrong, the old masters. Why not bring this ancient kind of technique of writing about images? Why not be a little mischievous about it? Why not bring it to a video game instead?
It's very interesting for me to have had the experience of reading this book, If All the World and Love Were Young, last summer, considering it in committee meetings, and then reading it again in preparation for this. So when I read it the first time, if you like, its Nintendo-esqueness, or that kind of aspect was very clear to me in the language and in the structure and in the way the material was organized. Reading it this time, I didn't see that at all. It was completely invisible. Reading it this time, what was coming off the page, which I mentioned before in our little preliminary chat, was its Ulsteresqueness, not conventional Ulsteresqueness. There aren't any red, white, and blue curbstones, and there are no men in balaclavas, but it's Ulsteresqueness, or its Ulsterishness, in terms of the evocation of place, the way in which you have a capacity for specificity that you, as a reader, if you live in Ulster, you go, yes, that is what the river is like. That is what the clouds are like. That is what it is like. And you've got a line in the Forest of Illusion 1. I mean, you've got many lines I could quote. The spiny caterpillar making letters on the branches. Brilliant. And I read that and I thought, why did I not ever think about that? It's so, yeah, of course, that's exactly what they do. And you've done that kind of thing. Just, you keep reading, if you're me, and you come across the equivalent of that, line after line, page after page, that makes you go, yes, yes, yes. How hard was this to do?
It was hard in a couple of different ways. I mean, I must admit, there are a lot of these poems towards the end that I tend not to read because they were very difficult to write, and I'm especially grateful for what Martin quoted, because there are lines that, to be honest, I don't read because I find them very difficult, and it's quite difficult to even hear it, although I appreciate it very much. I did believe that I had a duty to be somewhat honest. I mean, this is a poem, a book of poems that's trying to understand loss, and that is so difficult to understand that it decides to talk about a video game instead. I'm glad that you found the mention of Hippocrates kind of funny. There need to be kind of lighter moments throughout this.
It's brutal, but funny.
Yeah, and I think there needs to be a little bit of that kind of strange lightness. I feel as though the emotional range of this book, if it could have one, is very, very difficult on one end and kind of exhilarated with color on the other end. So there are difficulties. I find it difficult to write certain aspects of it. In a technical sense, it wasn't too difficult. I mean, I wrote a draft of this in I would say about 5-6 weeks over one summer, going through it. Obviously, it was edited many times after that, but the broad outline was there. And to say, I mean, what is Ulsterish, Ulsteresque? I'm not sure what the best suffix is, but all of them work. It's a little strange to me, but when I think about it, I can see exactly why that's so, and I remember why that's so. I mean, another way perhaps of understanding for me how the range of the book works is that it moves from the very specific outwards. I mean, the poem, it literally starts in my house, the childhood house that I grew up in, looking at a screen. And from there, it moves out into the world. So the second part of this broadens out to Northern Ireland, to Ulster more generally. The next part of it broadens out, there's a sort of underground section with diamonds sparkling in the walls. So I decided that might be rendered as South Africa for some reasons. There's a mine there. There's this like sense of expansion that keeps happening in it. But to mention the Ulster bit, it's another one of the things that I suppose I find a little humorous in the video game itself. The second part of it consists of a little island with a big hole in the middle of it. It's called Donut Plains. And I sort of thought, if one relaxes one's eyes a little bit, Northern Ireland with Lough Neagh is not a million miles away from the shape of a donut. And I find myself mapping these two things onto one another, the real place onto the digital place, to think that if there are, in the video game, these little mines to the left of it, well, then they must be the Marble Arch Caves. If there's a rope bridge on the north coast of this little digital island, which there is, well, that must be the rope bridge up in Antrim. So there's a lot of things that, that I allowed myself to do. I mean, I partly think of this as a work of translation, just one that I translated so poorly and strangely from the video game that I ended up describing Northern Ireland.
Mm. But it's the specificity with which the natural, topographical, cartographic, etc. world is rendered also characterizes the account of death that you present, and that is it's quite searing. I mean, I can understand why you mightn't. It might be difficult to read, but it is. That level of truthfulness is what gives the book. It gives the book a very special quality. Did you know that when you were writing it, or did it just come out this way?
I suspected that I was doing something that I wanted to keep doing. I mean, this happened as I say, quite quickly, 5-6 weeks. And it was in that sort of golden spot of I can't say how you produce things, but that sense that I don't want to do anything but this. It had my entire attention for a long period of time. So I took that as a good sign. But yes, I mean, there were a couple of moments, particularly towards the end, where I did say to myself, you should do this as honestly as you can. That's the way to do this. If you want to praise, which I want this book to do, then I have to do it honestly. And I felt that searing is a word that makes sense to me. I almost think of it too as not exactly welding, let's say, but I mean, I have through the sort of force of the experience, I've made those real moments that I still recall exactly. I have welded them, let's say, to these digital landscapes. I've created a kind of memento for myself. So I've seared them, is the word you used. I've seared these two things together, the real one into a digital one. A consequence of which is that if I view this video game again, I don't see the video game anymore. I see this book, which is sad for me, in a sense. And it feels a little bit like an act of vandalism that only I can see. That when I go in, I no longer see what I saw as a child. What I see is now this story happening alongside it. So there are losses. There are big losses. There are other losses. But yes. Difficulty in a lot of ways, but maybe not in terms of producing it.
You mentioned the underground section. There are also family genealogical Tasmanian sections or material. I'm mentioning this because it is an elegy, but it is also a very rich, nourishing cultural artifact, full of other stuff. I mean, Vanilla Secret 3 is the story of Orion's being saved by the dolphin. Quick, light, wonderful story, beautiful. Could have come from Ovid. In fact, it probably is in Ovid. And I should have checked, should have done my homework. So you've got this ability to switch iteration. It keeps changing. And therefore you are permanently surprised as a reader. And again, I come back to, is this something you planned and you organized, or did the muse just sing it out and you transcribed?
I do feel more than usual that I was acting instinctively. Perhaps muse isn't what I would opt for, but what I find myself doing is looking at a series of images and just allowing my imagination to respond to it. So a lot of it, you know, you see a tree on a screen, that's probably going to be a tree. If I see some dolphins, perhaps what I might have done is half remembered something from somewhere and tried to chase it up again. So a lot of it was kind of instinctive, but it turned out useful. I did a lot of reading about elegy, about these poems about death, poems about remembrance. And a key characteristic of those, it turns out, I didn't know at the time, is that more often than not, they are poems made of other poems, is one way of thinking about them. There is this sense that borrowing from one's peers, from one's ancestors, is a key part of it. I mean, we see that through many elegies over the last number, hundreds of years and beyond that. But this key element of finding grief too difficult to bear by oneself, so you seek solace from somewhere else. So while I didn't know I was doing that, what I ended up with was this book that is full of other stuff. It finds its support in other things. As I said, the whole gesture I feel of the book is, this is unbearable. I need some way to bear it. And you borrow this support from other places. But it is also quite lively. I mean, Johnny Cash is in there for some reason. He shows up. The Greek myths are there to some extent. There are some poems. There's a poem from Baudelaire that comes up through it. So there is this sense of picking things, of trying to, trying to translate this video game into literature, because I'm interested a little bit in our conceptions of higher culture and lower culture. And I'm interested because I want to be mischievous with it. Like, why not make Mario and Petrarch occur in the same poem? They're both Italians. They're both to some extent. Obviously Dante must be there. I mean, it turns out that, the video game is in 9 parts, as is, Dante's circles in the Inferno and the Paradiso. And the Purgatorio. So there are these structures that bring themselves in that I didn't have to do much with. They were things I merely noticed. And when I did feel any lack of confidence, I thought, well, I have this. I have all of this stuff that I can lean on.
It is very lively. That's a perfect word. But as a reader, you have the feeling that you spoke about it working instinctively, that there is this great, hot, molten body of inner feeling, hot, lava-like feeling. And were all these different forms the safe way to deal with the feeling? Or did you just, I'm going to have what I know, and I'm going to have what I feel, and I'm going to bring them together?
I think that's a very useful way for me to think about it, because it is led with a lot more feeling than I would enjoy sometimes. So there is that that combination in the middle. But it's perhaps also worth saying that I did not set out to write an elegy. I set out being mildly mischievous, to write this series of poems about a video game that I thought, wouldn't that be fun? There's an impulse towards completeness that those people who play video games might feel. And so I knew how many I would have to write in order to complete this. But it wasn't really until I was, I'd say, a third of the way in before I, felt what I thought I was doing and had to make a conscious choice whether or not I wanted to proceed with this. I started in mischief, and it was only at a certain point that I thought, that's what you're doing. And that was my subconscious at work. That was not my conscious self making this decision. But I did choose, well, if I'm going to do this, I should think about this. So whatever, I think at that point, my task was to try to maintain the energy I had, all the while allowing this other presence to come into it. And I think it does at a greater point. But yes, no abdication of responsibility here, but my goal was mischief. So I'm as surprised as anyone else that this turned into, one of the most sincere things I think I could write. It turns out the way to get there was through silliness.
I mean, there are many things I love about literature, obviously. But one of the things I love about it is that one has one's game, planned out, and then the unknown and unknowable part of oneself has a completely different idea, the instinctive, sunken, deep down unconscious self. And it, without you even knowing, takes you off the rail you were on and puts you on a completely different rail. And then suddenly you go, yes. And I would say that is also, that's what it is to be an artist. You are both simultaneously in charge, you're not in charge at all. Some other thing deep in you is, organizing and shifting and planning and surprising you. Because if you knew everything before you started, it would be boring, wouldn't it?
It would be entirely. And I think there was a part of me when I was younger who would have thought, I don't know, that's very Muse territory. It's getting into this part of a sort of spirituality that I wouldn't want to agree to. But I feel it. I know what that feeling is, and I don't know what the better word is for it than something like that, because I was led by an instinct that I didn't think was mine, and it was that ordering instinct. It was the subconscious that was trying to put this into a kind of sequence. I can't not take responsibility for it, but I understand that feeling. Something else was ordering this that wasn't strictly me.
I've only had the experience of writing narrative, not poetry, but one does very often think, right, the character's going to come into the room and say this, and they don't. They say something completely different. They do something completely different, and then you realize, yes, that was the right thing. And I just have to allow it to happen. Do you also work as a teacher?
That's right, yes.
At the Seamus Heaney Centre.
That's right, at Queen's in Belfast.
Helping to cultivate people's, develop, nourish, nurture people's literary capacity. Is there I do the same thing. Is there a relationship between that practice and your own personal creative practice, or are they sort of kept apart?
I feel as though they're very closely connected. I mean, I'm very lucky to be able to talk about poems and books frequently as a job. So that's something I absolutely cherish. Lately, what I've been doing is putting together, a very straightforward, a very simple lecture for our undergraduate students to, try and think about some principles of writing. And it's proven to be really oddly difficult because I realize there's a lot of things that I feel have become part of my intuition that I don't know how exactly to explain. I can do it. It's not a problem. But when I think of, you ought to use concrete language. You ought not to use abstract language, which I think is a perfectly fair and reasonable way to start. But then at some point you might read like Auden and think, oh wait, no, well, that's not always true, is it? And I wonder about all these rules that are useful for teaching and how many of them I adhere to. Many of them, I hope. I wouldn't want to be seen as hypocritical. But it's a joy to be able to think about all of these things and think, do I do these? Why don't I do them? To try to get close to yeah, whatever that magical quality is. If I can get everything else right, if I can prepare everything else for the subconscious to take over, that's what I'm hoping for.
That's very interesting. Before the Rooney Prize landed in your house.
Would you like to see it again?
Yes, please show it to us. There it is, isn't it? That is a thing of great loveliness.
In resin. No.
Other people, you had enjoyed many plaudits before the Rooney Prize, but I feel bound to ask, in your opinion, what does the Rooney Prize mean? What does winning it mean?
I could maybe try to answer that in a couple of ways. Perhaps by showing and not telling, which is not useful in an interview. But I confess that numerous times over, let's say, the past 5-6 years, when I did see the wonderful news of someone receiving this prize, one of the things that I did often late at night was have a little look online and look at that list of people who had also received it, and thought, yeah, that's it. That's the one, and this is a remarkable list of people who have won it, and to be in any way connected with them is an extraordinary feeling. I suppose what I would also say is the idea that this is an award that looks to the future is especially interesting to me, that it seeks to reward promise, as you said. I feel a wonderful responsibility to live up to that promise, and I intend to do my best to do that. But I suppose I'd also say I think it's fair to say that this might be the most prestigious and the most admired and most well thought of award that any of us will get in Ireland, and that's a very special feeling. I can't thank you does not do the job, but to have my poems, to have my work received so well at home, that feels like a very special thing.
Yeah, it's a very interesting prize, because it you need to read everything and make a judgment based on the virtue of what you find. So there's no hype involved. It's very different from prizes which are awarded to individual books. And I think this is a really, really wonderful book. Really fabulous book. We have a question from Laura. I'm going to read it out to you. And she writes, did you realize early on that you were onto something very unique with your use of the Super Mario landscape to explore such deep themes?
Thank you for asking, Laura. I said I was led by mischief, and usually mischief is something I trust a little bit. It's a very mild mischief, but mischief nonetheless is the right word. So I suspected that there was perhaps something interesting going on there. I hadn't read too much that was doing something similar. I think one of the things that might separate this from other poets who have written about video games and thought about them is going the whole hog, so to speak. I feel as though one thing that perhaps makes this interesting is its scale. I think this would not have worked if it was 10 pages long, if it was a little short sequence or something. I feel as though it had to participate in a very big gesture, that it had to give itself entirely over to this other kind of language. So I suspected and hoped that there might be something interesting happening with it. I didn't know. But then when I felt this other presence coming in, that it was about something quote unquote proper, like elegy, like that depth of feeling, that's when I gained a greater kind of confidence that it was this elegy contained in something less expected, let's say.
It starts with you as a boy. Were you a mischievous boy, or were you a quiet, obedient boy?
I suspect somewhere between the two, where we'd all hope to be. But I mean, one thing I suppose that it does start with me, and one of the things that I think is interesting. To me, it's interesting anyway. But this is a book that's ultimately based. It's trying to deal with these frames and to understand how one thing is inside another thing. I mean, this book arguably starts with, I say arguably, I won't have an argument, but I mean, it starts with a photograph. It starts with me trying to remember a photograph that my mother took of me sitting playing Super Mario World. So these frames of reference. And one of the things that one of the ways that I like to think about this is that, my mother is the author of this book in many ways. She's the author of this photograph on which this whole thing is based. So I think there are these layers and frames of artistry involved in all of this, and somehow at the middle of all of these is this very simple moment of me sitting in front of a television.
As well as being painful, was the preparation and the making of the text, the creation of this artifact, also a consolation? You talked about how it's very hard to bear grief, so one goes to other elegiasts and one can take their lines and take their support. But then you make an artifact, you make this book, this wonderful book. Is it in and of itself, and the making of it, a consolation to you?
I find that a difficult question to think about, but I often do think about it. One of the things I suppose I'm immediately inclined to say both yes and no. Yes, because I felt I was, I did it honestly, and I did it the way that I felt. I had a certain kind of duty that if I was going to do it in some way, I should do it. But one of the things that I also wanted to do by creating this kind of mnemonic counterpart for it, as I said, when I revisit this video game, I no longer see it. I get the feelings of this book. They're superimposed over it. Part of me didn't want to be consoled by it. I wanted it to be quick in that original sense. I wanted it to be live. I wanted this feeling to be living. I didn't really want to be consoled by it. So that wasn't really one of my impulses. The other strange thing, I suppose, when I think about it, is that I think an obvious way of maybe thinking about how the book works, and I found this, and I'm grateful for anyone who thinks about it. But I never saw this as about being, an escapist device or an escapist plot. And I think that's one of the ways we often think about this, that some things are hard and I want to get away from them. For me, I kind of found myself in a kind of bewildering place and wanting to get out of it again, like finding myself in this series of this world of symbols and icons and strange landscapes, and wanting to get back to the one that I recognized, in the way that grief makes the world feel really strange, and that you want to get back to how it used to be. So on one hand, I did ultimately end up feeling a little consoled by it, but the greater part of me didn't want to be. The greater part of me wanted to remember this feeling, because any diminution of it felt like more of a loss.
I mean, it's for me as a reader, and given especially the circumstances under which I'm reading it the second time. So I know, yes, I know people who have died as a result of this pandemic, and it is something that makes you, this experience that we're living through at the moment, makes you think about mortality more than one normally might. I found the text extraordinarily supportive, consoling, useful. I'm not quite certain what the word is. I was remarkably delighted to have a book about death as my companion in these times. And I thought I think that's very interesting.
That's a really,
because
yeah.
We're not really very good, Well, in Ireland, actually, we're a lot better than most people. Actually, in Ireland, we're brilliant. But generally, Western neo-capitalist society isn't that brilliant at death. But this is redressing. This is a corrective to that. We have a question from Anna. And she has asked, have you uncovered a style that you feel married to, or that you are continually going to return through writing? If all the world and love were young.
Thank you for asking, Anna. I feel the short answer to that is really no. I mean, I feel that for this book, I did try to develop a very particular style. Carlo, you mentioned once before that, well, you didn't say that you missed the commas in it, but you said there are no commas in this. And what that means, is difficult sometimes for the style. What I tried to do is find a way to make this sort of visual culture of a video game occur in language, in English specifically. And I tried to do that by some kind of easier, more straightforward ways. I mean, the Super Nintendo is a 16-bit console, which is to say that it can process 16 bits of memory in one sweep of its processor. So I figured that a processor might work in the same way that a poetic line works. So, I've got 16 syllable lines all the way through this, as if they're sweeps of kind of technological memory. That's really kind of a pun. I don't feel like that's a particularly, effective way of doing it, but it's a framework. I mean, I was trying to, as I say, translate this visual culture into this poetic language. I felt things like commas for some reason wouldn't make sense. I felt that a comma was a pause of an indeterminate period of time that for some reason a machine wouldn't quite understand. So I figured commas wouldn't be there. But I also love the idea that it creates these strange collisions of phrase that might cause these little moments of pause, or a reader might think, oh, what was that? To give it a kind of physicality really is what I hoped for, that at various points the reader would be jolted into thinking, oh yes, I didn't quite read that, or I misread that. And that was partly to try to approximate this feeling of a character moving left to right over a screen and encountering things and bumping over them, to try and make that sensation occur. I mean, I should say maybe one book that you might know, Anna, but a marvelous book that really influenced me a lot was Emer McBride's book, A Girl is a Half-Formed Thing, and what it does with language. And, I felt this unbelievable moment in my imagination, I don't know, 40 pages in, where I felt I can understand this now. And that was such a powerful moment for me, where I felt so intimately connected to the book. And I wanted this sort of moment of difficulty to feel like it was happening in the book, that these phrases might collide with each other, but soon enough you might learn how the book wants you to read it. That was an ambition anyway, that there would be a little bit of roughness, but that it would smooth out. But I think that style is particular to this. This doesn't feel like my natural way of writing. This style is for this book, I think.
So when you're talking about Emer McBride's A Girl is a Half-Formed Thing, at page 40, was it that suddenly you felt as if the voice had clicked, or you tuned in? Was that what you got? Exactly
that. And for me, it felt like a physical click. I didn't think my machinery was like that, but it almost felt like a physical click in my brain. And that was such a moment of intimacy for me with the text. I was with it through anything after that.
Because I would say, If All the World and Love Were Young has exactly the same phenomenon, because of the 16-bit virtual quality. You're reading, and then suddenly you get this little jolt. That's it. You've tuned in, and then you're absolutely in its power, and it's organizing your thoughts. The language is saturating you and suborning you in some way to its rhythm and message and content, and it floods in. It's very, very interesting, and enormously well done. And once you've clicked, it's much earlier than page 40 or page 30. Once you've clicked, you're away. Are you enjoying lockdown?
As much as almost anyone else, I guess. The first one was bearable. The first one was okay. I took my exercise in the park with almost no one else. That was very pleasant. It's not as pleasant at the moment, but I'm very fortunate. I'm healthy. Everyone around me is healthy. We're all well. I've been eating better. Enjoy is maybe not the word, but I could bear the first one. This one's harder, especially since January keeps going on and on.
Well, January is going to last about a year. And my children rather cruelly keep saying to me, "Oh, well, Dad was made for lockdown." I find I was asking because do you find that this kind of hermetic existence that we're living in, is it conducive to productivity, or is it inimical? Does it stop you writing? That was really what I was trying to get to.
Fortunately, I haven't found any major impact on it. Sure, there are fewer people to overhear saying interesting things and to put in your back pocket for later. But I have, I've been able to produce things relatively well. I mean, the one thing that I'm really guarding against is writing about it, or having this as a subject. I feel as though that will be. I wonder if this is an example of one of those occasions that is so widely experienced as to be not interesting as a subject for writing. I don't know that, of course, but I'm interested in how this is affecting our imaginations. Not it itself, not what one does on a daily basis, but I'm really interested in how this has changed our thinking. Maybe like me, you had those very strange dreams for a while in March and April, which seemed to be a commonplace thing.
I have had endless dreams in which I appear to be in a North Korean re-education camp, but it's in the Kara or it's in Antrim or somewhere, and I'm marching around and being shouted at. Yes, it is. I'm certain you're right. It is altering our psyche. We're going to emerge from this as different people. You generally optimistic about the future?
I'm extremely interested in the future. Yes, I think I am. Interestingly, I read a marvelous book lately. Who's the name of the author? Sardar is the name of the author. That's his surname. It's a book about the future and how to understand the future. And I think that's an impulse that we're all developing at the minute. I don't know about you, but I feel as though time has become slightly different as a consequence of our condition. And I think we're extremely interested as a kind of traumatic response, maybe in looking back at, say, 1918 with that flu, of thinking of other pandemics that are like this, of trying to find ways to understand the present by understanding the past. And I think our interest in time is maybe greater than it usually is during this time. So yes, I'm optimistic for the future. I hope I'm there for all of it.
I am sure, Mr. Sexton, that your future is going to be glorious.
You're very kind, Carlo.
Martin, that was brilliant. And it is now 8:10, and I was instructed to go for an hour, and we've been going for an hour. So can I say, gentlemen, thank you both very, very much. And thank you to Molly and the audience. And listen, ladies and gentlemen, go and buy this book. Mine is a very beautiful penguin proof copy, which is a different color to the one you'll find in the shop, which is a turquoise. Yes. Show it so that people, yes, that's what it looks like. But I've got the the penguin, the old-fashioned looking penguin. And whatever form you get it in, you're not going to be disappointed, ladies and gentlemen. It is a book you should definitely invest in. Martin, Stephen, thank you.